I've never lost a staring contest.
Hey, welcome everybody tonight. Rojo and I realize it's been a long time since we've actually been down in the shop. We actually have gone riding tonight and had a great time, but we wanted to get a quick video up. It was requested by Sova KLR back when we were doing Everride's project bike. Asked if I could go through and kind of go through how I evaluate a bike when I buy a used one. So I'm going to do that real quick with you guys today. This is certainly not everything that you could check. Anything that you find that's suspicious, you could make sure and delve into it a little deeper. But these are the things I do generally when I look for a used bike. You're going to need 4 things. Okay, first thing, you're going to want a notebook, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. You want a pen to write in that notebook, okay? Because that's going to be what you use to negotiate with the seller your final price. You want a flashlight, especially if you're looking at a bike at night. I don't really recommend that, but and I've done it in the past. And you need a little screwdriver with a little flathead blade on it, okay? So if you take those 4 things with you when you go to look at a bike, every time you go, you'll have the things you need. First thing you're going to do is you start systematically going from the front of the bike to the back of the bike and from the bottom to the top. That's the way I do it, then you don't miss anything. Also, you want to write down everything wrong you can find in this book, okay? Because that's going to give you an idea what kind of costs you're going to be looking at when you start making repairs. So I always bring a book and I just start writing them down, because you're going to forget by the time you get to the back of the bike. You're going to forget little details that you see, so write everything down. So here's what I do. I take just a glance overview, look at the bike, look for any obvious things like missing chain, missing sprockets, broken stuff, broken spokes, damaged frames, obvious broken fins off the motor, just real obvious stuff kind of to start with. Look at the paint, look if you have any dings in the tank. Look at kind of what other stuff they put on the bike, and just take a general overview. Then I always start down here at the very bottom in the front, okay? First thing I do is inspect the tire. Now a tire can have good knobbies on it, but it can be weather cracked, and that's really dangerous if you ride on the street. So you're going to look for weather cracks on both sides of the knobbies and on the front and backs of all the knobbies. And if you have weather cracks, you'll pretty much see it. This has got some starting, but it's really not bad. Then you're going to go through and you're going to squeeze the spokes real quick. And if you have a loose spoke or a broken spoke, you're going to see it. Just takes a second. You squeeze them all. These are all nice and tight, okay? Then what you're going to do is you're going to look at the brake. And this is where your little flashlight comes in handy. And you're going to look and see how much brake pad is left. And there's a moderate amount of brake pad there. And then you're going to look at the front sprocket. Look and see if there's any obvious heat damage, which will be very discolored. You'll see a blue area or something, and then it will probably mean that it's warped. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to look at the fork tubes. Look for any obvious damage underneath. There's covers right here. You want to hope that they're both there. It's not a deal breaker if they're not. And then you start to go up and look at the fork seals. Now one of the things on this bike is I know it's got a blown fork seal on this side. It looks like the guys try to put silicone to stop it rather than actually repair the fork seal. So I know that needs fork seals. That could mean that it's going to need bushings, because if you run a fork dry, it's going to wear out the bushings. So when I write my notes, I say left fork seal, possible other damage, which could mean, bushings are the most likely thing. And then you're going to look at the brake line. You're going to see if there's any obvious leaks in the front brake line or any damage there. Can't see any here. You're going to look at the speedo cable and make sure it's attached and not loose, if the bike has a speedometer cable. And then you're going to start to work your way up, okay? Look for the fender, make sure there's not anything obviously loose there. And as you go up, you're going to want to look at the top of the fork tubes, see if there's any damage there. And this is where I like to use my little screwdriver. You want to make sure these rotate, okay? Now this is too small of a screwdriver for this. I need to get a bigger one. But you want to make sure that you can rotate any adjustment dials. There's some on the bottom too. I'll skip that for this evaluation, but that's what you'd want to do, is make sure you can turn them. If you can't, that means that one of your adjusters is seized, and you're probably going to have to pull the forks or the shock apart to fix it right. Then I like to pull the bike up and just kind of turn and feel the head bearings. Also, you can put on the front brake and rock back and forth. You feel that front end is really soft. This is an enduro bike, so it's likely to be, but I don't feel any obvious movement in the head bearings there, and I cannot feel any ratcheting or clicking. That feels pretty smooth. So next thing you're going to do is you're going to look at the levers. You're going to take the throttle and you're going to blip the throttle, okay? See how that is just really stiff? That's no bueno. That's not good. That's going to have to be repaired. I write it down in my book. Throttle sticking, okay? Then you're going to look over here at the front brake. You're going to feel if you have pressure. If it really fades, you know you've got at least fluid to change and or a line to change and or a leaking caliper. And you want to look for that when you're down looking at the front brake. Next thing you're going to do is you're going to feel the clutch. You're going to make sure it actuates. And it does go pretty good. Now right here is a decompression lever. And I noticed this right away. You can see that decompression lever is not working. So if I want that to function correctly, I'm going to have to definitely do something about that. So I write that down in my book. Now on this particular bike right here, you have an oil filler tube, and you're going to want to check and see if there's oil in there and what it looks like. Now as I pull this out, you can see that there's oil on there, and it actually is pretty clean. The next thing you want to do, as weird as this sounds, you want to smell it. You want to smell for gas or antifreeze. Now this bike's air cooled, so you're not going to have antifreeze, but on other bikes that are water cooled, you want to check so you make sure you don't have like a crack in your block or something like that. So of course this one, there's no gas in there, so that's a good sign that the oil part is okay. I'm having a hard time putting that back on. There we go. Next thing you want to do is you want to take the tank off, the actual
Gas cap.
gas cap. Thanks, homie. Gas cap off. I'm not sure which key does that. Okay, that's going to be an obvious problem.
A perfect example of why you checked your gas cap
Yeah.
before
There it goes.
you bring it home, Mr. Duff Actor.
Yep, that's right. I got
Shots
it
fired.
off. Look in there. Gas, I don't know how old that is, but there's no rusting inside the tank. It actually looks pretty clean. Did you see that? Okay, that looks, I mean, there's no rust inside there, so that looks pretty good. I don't know how old that gas is. I know how I can find out though. Okay, so then what we look at as we come back on the bike, starting from the bottom up, so I'm taking inspection of the motor. You can see there's oil all over here, and I can see that the concentration of oil is right around this Kickstarter seal. So I write that down. Kickstarter seal, it's got to be replaced if I want to stop the leak. This is where the oil filter is. Look around to see if there's any leaking there. Not really. It's air cooled. Look for bolts missing. There's the decompression lever for the exhaust cam. Bolts are all there. No obvious problems that I can see other than that seal right there. At the same time, you're going to look at exhaust gaskets. You can see a dark black area coming out from the exhaust if it's leaking. This has definitely been kind of an aftermarket. Guys tried to seal it up there. I will definitely be changing that. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to check the rear brake. And you're going to want to lift the bike up, activate the rear brake, and make sure it works. Make sure it at least stops. Okay, so that seems to be okay. You can take the cap off and look at what the fluid looks like, and you can take your little flat blade screwdriver and dip it in and pull it out and see if it looks contaminated. One of the things I like to do anyway is just change the brake line fluid. That's no big deal. Then you're going to come back and you're going to look at the connections of the swing arm and see if you can see any obvious wearing. Now one of the things you can do is you can pick the bike up and you can push it side to side, okay, like this. And you can feel a clunk, 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 clunk somewhere if one of those are bad. I don't feel that, so that looks good. And this has aftermarket Zerk fittings, and there's been grease spill out on it, so they probably replenished that periodically. The other thing is I want to inspect the rear shock. And if you see any oil residue on the shaft of the shock, it's probably damaged the seal head, and you're going to have to take it apart and or have someone qualified take it apart and rebuild it. That can be an expensive thing if you're not doing it yourself. A seal head is only about $40, but if you have to pay someone to do it, that's $250 to $300 just to replace that. So then you're going to come down and look at basic connectors. You're going to look at your rear brake. Pad is good, but there's rust around. It's just surface rust around the rear rotor, so you kind of want to have to clean that off at some point. Then you check your rear spokes. Do the same thing. Quick squeeze. Takes you just a second. You do that on all your spokes and make sure they're all secure, which they are. You inspect the rear tire, make sure there's no weather cracking, and that the knobbies are pretty good. You can look and see what kind it is. These are Pirelli. Looks like they're Pirelli.
MT21.
Is it an MT21? Yep, there we go, MT21. Look at the other side. You're going to look underneath at obvious things like the exhaust. Is it connected tight? Okay, we've got a whole kinds of electrical stuff to look at, but we're going to come over on this side. This is the drive side. You can see we've got oil on this side of the engine. So you're going to kind of try to trace that, and it looks like it's coming from around this area. So there's a seal behind the countershaft sprocket. Most likely that's worn out, and so we'd have to take this off and look at it. It doesn't look like it's around this magneto cover, but so that's another thing you're going to write down in your book, that it's going to need a countershaft sprocket seal. Then you look at the chain, definitely worn. Kind of grab it and see how loose it is. If you've got links that are crooked and stuck, it's a sign of corrosion. That's pretty loose. Look at the rear sprocket. Actually, really isn't in too bad a shape. That's very rideable there. Then you're going to take your little flat blade screwdriver and you're going to try to turn the compression adjuster on the rear shock, and you're going to make sure that you're able to adjust that so that you can fine tune your suspension. You're going to make sure that the choke knob works. Okay. You're going to make sure that the petcock works and doesn't leak. That one's kind of tight, but that's okay. That's the way Rojo likes it. And then the next part, once you kind of get that done, by the way, you want to check the rebound adjuster on the opposite side of the lower part of the shock. And then what you're going to do is you're going to then take some time to start the bike. Now, I've bought several bikes that did not run. And I'd asked the buyer several questions about what it did, how it behaved, and you're taking a risk when you do that. But I felt comfortable with the risks that I've taken in the past. I have not even started this bike yet, but I know the history of it, and I know the individual where I got it from, and they have had it running, and they just they said that it needed a valve adjustment, which is no big deal. So while we're talking about that, there's one thing you can do. You want to make sure that they start the engine for you, or you start it, and you want to listen to it. And this is a little trick that you can do as you're listening to the motor. If you hear it noisy, some people say, "Oh, geez, that sounds terrible." But it might not be a big deal at all. I mean, you might tell the person, "Man, I'm taking a big risk on this engine. It could blow up on me, cost me a lot of money." But you can take a little pole like this, and you stick your ear on the end of the pole, and you actually stick the pole on different parts of the motor, and you listen as it's running. And you'll hear a metallic kind of sound of things moving. And as you move around, you can listen and hear the piston, and you can hear if it's really slapping in there. You know, geez, it might be worn out. I might need to rebuild the engine. And as you get up here, you'll hear the valve train going, and it might be that all this sounds pretty okay, but you get up to the valve train and you can hear it clattering, kick, 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 and then all of a sudden you know, well, it's probably just a valve, or at the worst, maybe the valve train is worn out and I have to replace and redo the valves and the head. But that's really not a big deal if you do it yourself, and it could be just that all you need to do is adjust them. So you write that down in your book as well. You check out all your electrical. You make sure that your blinkers work, your high beam, your low beam, your horn, your brake light, your rear blinkers, and make sure that all that stuff works. And if it doesn't, you write that stuff down in your book. And then what you do is you kind of just take a guesstimate on how much each of those things would cost if you repaired it yourself, and how much it would cost if you had someone do it for you. And then let's say the individual is trying to sell this bike for $1,000. Seat covers, another thing to look at. Let's say they want $1,000 for this bike. What you do is you then take your book out and you say, well, I've got fork seals, I've got, you know, fork bushings, and that's going to cost me $200 if I have someone do it. You can just tell them, you know, I just don't really know how to do this stuff. So you got 200 there, and then you got seals along, you know, your Kickstarter seal, and you've got your countershaft sprocket seal, and you know, you've got seals leaking where your cams are. You say, okay, that's going to cost another $100 for that. And then as you go back and you kind of identify all these little things, maybe it's got some lights that aren't working, and you think, oh, I'm going to have to repair those. I don't know what that's going to cost. And you kind of go through each one of those items, and you say, okay, you want $1,000 for the bike, but for me to have a bike that's really worth $1,000, I need to repair all this stuff. And to do that, it's going to cost me $500. And so what you have to do is evaluate in your mind, is it worth $500 to you to buy that bike and know you've got $500 to put into it? And if it is, then you just offer them, say, I'll give you $500, I'm going to put another $500 into it myself. And you know, if the buyer is, or the seller is not willing to do that, then you know you're going to have to put that into it. Maybe you need to check on other bikes and see. One of the things, whenever I sell a bike, I make sure there's nothing that the person can talk it down. You know, I make sure that there's no leaks, and I make sure that everything's in prime condition, that it's jetted right and it runs well, because that's how you end up getting bikes for a good deal. Now, this bike I ended up getting for $400, okay? It kind of goes against what most people would say is wise in terms of buying a bike, but I did get this from a dealer. I can't tell you which dealer it was from. They don't want they don't want it out there. But basically, this bike I paid $400 for, never having seen it. Okay. The reason for that is because I know an individual that works at the dealership. I'm good friends with one of the mechanics there. I've sponsored him by doing suspension work for some of his race bikes, and because of that, I could find out information about it. They paid $700 or $800 on this bike as a trade-in, so they lost $300 or $400 just to sell this bike to me. But they wanted it out of their garage. They didn't have room for it, and so for them, it was just better to just sell it to me and take a loss. That's how I got that bike as well. It runs. There's some things that need to be done, mostly cosmetic, but I got both of these bikes on a pair deal for $800, and the way I did that was by just telling him about all these different things that were going to need to be done. He's a mechanic, he knows. The shop was not going to pay a mechanic's wage to go through and fix all these things, because by the time they did, they'd lose even more money. So for them, it was a better deal to just sell them at a discount to me. So that's some basics. There's a lot of other stuff that you can do, but if you basically go through that kind of stuff, you're going to have a general idea what you're looking at. And if you're not comfortable knowing what the prices of those things are, then just tell the seller, listen, I'm going to check on this price, on all this sort of stuff, and then I'll get back with you tomorrow. Go call on what all the parts are. If he sells it by the next day, don't feel bad. There's going to be another bike available. And you can have accurate parts, and then it gives you a little more bargaining power too. You can just say, listen, this is what it's going to cost if I do it all myself. And so if he's not willing to go down the price, you walk away, go find something else. Go find a bike that someone like me would sell that's in perfect condition. So if you guys have any questions or anything, let me know. But that's kind of the down and dirty on buying a used bike. And I'm not always the best one, because there's some things that I just want and I'm willing to pay for, like the Fonda. And then there's other bikes that I get that are just dirt cheap that I don't mind putting a little time and effort and money into to get them. But this way, if you put that money in there, you want to make it so you could turn around and sell it and at least break even. That's pretty good for a recreational vehicle in my mind. So any questions, let us know, okay? Rojo Neck Duff Factor out.